everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. The Supreme Court is starting a new term today with only 8 justices amid controversy over the confirmation of nominee Brett Kavanaugh. The FBI is now looking into allegations of sexual assault against the judge after Senator Jeff Flake said he would not vote to confirm him without it. But now some lawmakers are raising questions about the scope of the investigation. Today, President Trump is pushing back, saying he's more concerned about it going quickly.
Let the Senate decide whatever they want to do is okay with me. And also the FBI. I think the FBI should do what they have to do to get to the answer. The FBI is really working hard, and they're putting in a lot of hours. So hopefully they can come up with what everybody's looking for. But no, I'm guided by the Senate. I want to make the Senate happy because ultimately they're making the judgment. I'm not making the judgment. I've already made my judgment.
And CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid is at the White House. Paula, we just heard the president talking about the scope of this FBI investigation. Reporters were trying to get at the meat of who is sort of controlling it or placing the parameters around it. And the president seemed to punt that question a little bit by saying, well, the Senate is the one that's placing those parameters, not me. Is that accurate?
That's right. The president says he's dictated by the Senate. The FBI says they're dictated by the White House. And ultimately, the Senate says it's all up to the FBI. It's very circular. But here's what we know from our reporting. Over the weekend, the FBI confirmed to us that the White House has, in fact, put some limitations on the extent to which they can conduct what is a supplementary background check. They've already done 6 background checks on Judge Kavanaugh over time. This is not a criminal investigation. This is just a look into his fitness for office. They are working on behalf of the White House. So the White House is effectively their client. When this decision was made on Friday to reopen the background check to look into these claims of alleged sexual assault, there are 3 potential claims they could look into. There are up to 20 witnesses. And the big question was, well, how far can the FBI go? We are currently told that the FBI is being restricted by the White House, but you just heard the president say there in the Rose Garden. He says you can interview all 3 people who have made allegations. He said there's no problem by him with interviewing Judge Kavanaugh. He says you need to do what you need to do. So now the question for us to report out through the rest of the afternoon is, well, where does the FBI get its marching orders? Does it take the word of the president at the podium as sufficient for them to interview any witness they want to interview and do whatever they need to do, no matter how long it takes? Or are they still constrained by what Don McGahn is telling them they can and cannot do? So it's still not exactly clear, but the president saying very publicly they should do whatever they need to do and talk to whoever they need to talk to.
It was interesting, Paula, also because one question referred to Judge Kavanaugh's comments about his drinking and whether there was any chance that the FBI would turn up information slightly different than what the judge had portrayed and whether he would have perjured himself. And the president seemed to have heard something different than what the rest of us had heard. He said, I heard a man talk about, having problems with alcohol at some point and now no longer does. But we didn't hear Judge Kavanaugh admit to any sort of problems with alcohol.
So let's be clear, we now have 2 lanes of public inquiry here. First is whether or not there's any corroborating evidence about these allegations of sexual assault, or whether, in the words of the prosecutor who was used during this hearing, this is just he said, she said. Now, there are also questions about his drinking and whether or not he was truthful about that. Let's be clear, it's not a crime to drink alcohol. It's not a crime to abuse alcohol, but it is, of course, a crime to perjure yourself in front of Congress. But again, you're asking someone to objectively assess their alcohol intake. Anyone who's been at a party where there's been drinking or knows someone who perhaps struggles with alcohol, it is rare that people have an objective assessment of their own relationship with alcohol, especially those who tend to maybe overdo it. It's also subjective depending on your size, how much you drink, how much you've eaten. I think it's tricky. We're really in uncharted territory. The idea of trying to hold someone accountable for potential perjury based on their own assessment of their drinking, keep them off the Supreme Court because they did not accurately describe their relationship with alcohol. I think that's why you saw the president sort of dodge and weave around that issue of perjury. He himself does not drink. He doesn't like people who do. But I think that's a very unprecedented place to be when discussing a Supreme Court nominee.
Sure. All right. Now, Paula, we're in a lot of unprecedented places. The president's remarks today were initially meant to focus on trade. And what did the president say about the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement exactly?
That's right. This was a bit of a victory lap for the president here about one of his signature campaign promises, which was to revamp NAFTA. And here, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. have come to a deal to terminate NAFTA. And there's going to be a new deal called the USMCA. The president liked to say that. And while he had a lot of superlatives for this, the biggest, the best, the most wonderful deal, really a lot of what we know has to do with two things, Tanya: cows and cars. Let's start with the cars. Under this deal, they're going to try to increase the percent of parts inside a car that are manufactured in North America. It's going to go from about 62.5% all the way up to 75%. They're also going to try to increase the percentage of each car, the work that goes into it, make sure those jobs pay at least $16 an hour. Now, some analysts say this will provide additional jobs, good middle-class jobs, but there are also concerns that this could have an impact on smaller cars. It could make them so expensive to manufacture here in the U.S. that they have to go over to China to be manufactured over there. Now, on the second subject, cows, dairy products. We heard the president talk a lot about this, and in this press conference, he confirmed dairy was the deal breaker here when it came to Canada. He wanted the U.S. to have more access to Canada's dairy market, and under this agreement, they will get that. Yeah, you heard him give a specific shout out to ice cream, specifically U.S. ice cream products that will be able to be sold in a slightly larger share of the Canada's dairy market. So those seem to be the two pillars of this, but right now it remains to be seen really how this impacts everyday Americans, and a lot of this actually won't even go into effect until 2020.
And Paula, what is the timeline on this moving forward? You said it won't go into effect till 2020, but are there any problems it could face between now and then?
Well, the biggest hurdle will be Congress, and you heard the president talk about that. He even said, a very confident man, said he is not confident that Congress will ultimately agree to ratify NAFTA in this way. We're, of course, watching the midterms. This will not actually go to Congress officially until late November after the midterms. If the Democrats take the House, it's possible that they could demand certain changes or alterations to this agreement. And you saw the president saying, look, I know this could be a problem. He didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Congress, but this is not a done deal yet. I think this is a win for the president when he goes to those rallies, Tanya. The biggest applause line is always when he talks about NAFTA and changing that, and when he refers to it as the worst deal ever made. I think this will be a win for him, something he can take back to his supporters as he campaigns for the midterms and be like, look, I brought you a new deal. It's a better deal. Whether or not Congress ratifies it, well, that remains to be seen.
And it even has a new name, a new acronym.
Yes.
All right, Paula Reid in Washington, thank you.